Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It was late, just after midnight, when Mike received an order that he should have never taken. He'd been working at Domino's for about 6 months, and by that point, most of his shifts were routine. He knew the streets of the small suburban town well, and most customers were just hungry college students or tired parents. But tonight, something felt different. The call came through just as he was closing out his previous delivery. The order was from an address at the edge of town, a long stretch of darkened road where the only other buildings were old, abandoned homes. The customer requested the pizza be delivered exactly at 12:30 a.m., no earlier, no later. It was a strange request, but nothing that raised any major red flags. Maybe the customer was a night owl, or maybe they just worked a late shift. Mike didn't think much of it at the time. He grabbed the pizzas, put them in the delivery bag, and headed out. The drive there was eerie. As he left the well-lit part of town, the lights dimmed, and soon he was surrounded by darkness. The only sounds were the tires humming along the empty road and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Mike's phone buzzed twice with the ringtone of a notification, but when he checked, it was nothing important, just a message from his friend about plans for the weekend. When Mike reached the address, he felt a sudden unease. The house was large, older than most of the homes in the area, with a long, winding driveway leading up to it. The front porch light flickered weakly, casting shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across the yard. The house looked abandoned, its windows dark and uninviting. Still, the delivery was the delivery. He knocked on the door. The sound echoed in the stillness of the night. He waited a few moments before ringing the doorbell. No answer. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, the door creaked open slightly, just enough for someone to speak from behind it. "Leave it on the porch," came a low, gravelly voice, barely audible, but clear enough to make Mike's skin prickle. The man didn't even show himself, just a voice, cold and distant. Mike felt a shiver crawl up his spine, but he did as he was told, setting the pizzas down and backing away slowly. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye, movement in the shadows near the edge of the porch. It was brief, but unmistakable. A figure, tall and thin, watching him. The hairs on his neck stood on end. Mike didn't wait around to investigate. He hurried back to his car, his footsteps quick and uneven, the sensation of being watched never leaving him. He didn't know why, but something gnawed at him as he drove away. Something was wrong. He couldn't shake the feeling that the figure on the porch hadn't just been some trick of the light or his imagination running wild. It felt real. Too real. The next morning, Mike got a call from his manager. The customer from that night had called to complain. The pizzas were cold, they said. Not only were they cold, the voice on the other end of the phone said, but they were wrong. I didn't order pepperoni, I ordered sausage. And when you left them, you didn't leave the right tip. Mike felt a lump form in his throat. What the hell was the customer talking about? There had been no order for sausage. He double-checked the receipt. Pepperoni, just like it said. But when he thought back to the previous night, he realized the strange part of the story. The address on the receipt hadn't matched the house he'd gone to. He'd delivered to an old abandoned house, and yet the name on the receipt had been a common name, one he didn't recognize. His manager laughed it off. It's probably just a prank or something. People do weird things with their orders all the time. But Mike couldn't stop thinking about the figure on the porch. The tall, thin shape that had watched him without making a sound. Something wasn't right, and the feeling gnawed at him through the entire shift. A week later, Mike received another order from the same address. This time, he didn't hesitate. He called his manager, told him about the previous encounter, and asked if there was any way someone else could take the delivery. His manager dismissed his concerns, telling him to stop being paranoid, but Mike couldn't shake the feeling. The next night, against his better judgment, Mike found himself driving to that same house again. As he got closer, the unease in his stomach grew. He parked at the end of the long driveway, but this time, he wasn't going to just leave the pizzas on the porch. He had to see who was behind all of this. Mike approached the house cautiously, his breath catching in his throat as the porch light flickered once more. This time, as he reached the door, he didn't knock or ring the bell. Instead, he slowly turned the handle. The door creaked open, and he stepped inside. The air was musty, the smell of mildew heavy in his lungs. The house was eerily quiet, like it hadn't been lived in for years. But then, just as he thought he was alone, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere deep within the house. His heart raced. Mike turned back to leave, but the door slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang. Panic set in. He was trapped. From the shadows of the hallway, the same figure emerged. Tall, thin, and with eyes that gleamed an unnatural red. It wasn't human, not in the way Mike had hoped. The thing moved closer, its steps silent on the creaky floorboards, as though it had no weight at all. It wasn't a person. The thing's mouth twisted into something that could have been a grin, but Mike could see no teeth, just blackness where a mouth should be. "I didn't order pizza," the thing whispered in a voice that was both the man's and not the man's at all. "You shouldn't have come here." The walls of the house seemed to close in around him, suffocating him with the smell of decay and rot. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the thing was gone. The door swung open on its own, the wind howling through the house. Mike ran. He didn't stop until he was back in his car, breathing heavy and drenched in sweat. His hands shook as he turned the ignition and sped off into the night, his heart still pounding in his chest. When he returned to work the next day, he tried to tell his manager what had happened, but the man didn't believe him. "You probably just had a bad dream, Mike," he said, dismissing him with a wave. "The house is probably just abandoned. You're just letting your imagination get the best of you." But Mike knew what he'd seen, and he knew what had followed him that night. He never went back to that address, and every time he heard that name on an order receipt, a chill ran down his spine. The house was never torn down, and to this day, the locals say it's empty. But Mike knows better. He knows there's something waiting inside that house, something dark, something that was never meant to be disturbed. And as for the deliveries, he's not the only one who's been drawn to that address. There are stories, many stories of pizza deliveries that never make it back.
Story number 2.
It started with a simple phone call, one of those late-night orders that felt more like a mistake than a real request. Lisa had just gotten off her shift at the Domino's branch on the edge of town. It was almost 1 a.m., and she was just about to close up for the night. She was already exhausted and ready to head home when the phone rang. "Hello?" she answered, her voice tired but professional. There was a strange pause on the other end, followed by a low, raspy voice. "One large pizza, extra cheese, thin crust." Lisa frowned. It was a simple order, but something about the voice made her uneasy. It wasn't the kind of voice she usually heard from customers. There was a strange rasp to it, like someone who hadn't spoken in days, maybe weeks. "I'll need an address," she said, trying to push the feeling of discomfort aside. Another long pause. "Eastwood Drive, near the old cemetery," the voice replied. "I'll be waiting." Lisa glanced at the map on the wall, her stomach sinking when she saw where the address was. Eastwood Drive was a part of town that had been abandoned for years. The old cemetery was at the far end, surrounded by overgrown grass and crumbling tombstones. No one had lived there in a decade. In fact, the neighborhood was more or less a ghost town at this point. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the phone as she glanced toward the kitchen. Her manager was long gone for the night, and there were no other deliveries scheduled. The voice on the other end spoke again, drawing her attention back. "I need that pizza," it rasped. Despite the unease creeping up her spine, she took down the address and prepared the order. It was strange, but she was on the clock, and she couldn't exactly refuse. She figured the caller was just some prankster or an unfortunate soul living in the isolated area. The drive there felt longer than usual. The roads were empty, the only sound the hum of the car's engine and the occasional rustle of wind. As she got closer to the cemetery, her headlights cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. The air felt cold, even though it was a warm spring night. When she finally reached Eastwood Drive, the area was even more eerie than she had imagined. The streetlights were dim, casting a sickly yellow glow over the abandoned houses. There were no cars in sight, no signs of life. The cemetery loomed at the far end of the street, its iron gates rusted and hanging open like an invitation to something sinister. Lisa pulled up to the house listed on the address, but it wasn't really a house. It looked more like a dilapidated building, the windows boarded up, the front porch sagging with years of neglect. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, there was only darkness. A chill ran down her spine as she stepped out of the car, pizza box in hand. She felt as though something was watching her, but when she glanced around, there was no one in sight. Taking a deep breath, she walked up the creaky porch steps and knocked on the door. There was no answer at first. She knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Just as she was about to turn around and leave, she heard the sound of slow, heavy footsteps from inside. The door creaked open just a few inches, and a figure stood in the shadows. The figure was tall and gaunt, dressed in an old, tattered coat that seemed to blend into the darkness. Lisa couldn't see its face, but there was something wrong about the way it stood, like it was more a part of the shadows than a person. It extended a bony hand toward her. "Pizza," the voice rasped, its words barely more than a whisper. Lisa handed over the box without a second thought, her heart racing in her chest. As soon as the figure took it, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Lisa jumped, her pulse hammering in her ears as she rushed back to her car. She didn't even look back as she drove away. The next morning, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling of dread. She had tried to rationalize it, the creepy voice, the dilapidated house, the figure at the door, but something about it still didn't sit right with her. She had heard nothing from the customer, no complaint or feedback, which was unusual for the late-night orders. The whole encounter felt wrong, like she had walked into something she wasn't supposed to see. Later that day, Lisa received a call at the store. It was from the same number, the one she had received the previous night. "Hello?" She answered cautiously, wondering if it was some prankster calling again. But the voice on the other end made her blood run cold. It was the same raspy voice, but this time, it was quieter, more urgent. "Did you see me?" the voice asked. "Did you see my face?" Lisa's throat went dry. "Who is this?" she demanded, trying to keep the fear from her voice. There was a long pause before the voice spoke again, but this time it was different. It was much closer, like the person was standing right next to her. "I need you to deliver the pizza again. This time, come alone." The line went dead. Lisa's hands shook as she hung up the phone, the terror creeping up her spine once again. She didn't know what to do. She had no idea who or what she had encountered the night before, but she knew one thing. She couldn't go back there. She never did. A few days later, the police found the old house on Eastwood Drive. It had been abandoned for years, but when they entered, they discovered something chilling. The place wasn't empty. It was full of old, faded pizza boxes, some stacked in piles, others strewn across the floor. Most unsettling of all, the boxes had been opened, each with a single slice missing, but there was no sign of the person who had been ordering. They say the figure is still out there, waiting for the next delivery. And if you happen to drive down Eastwood Drive late at night, you might just hear the rasping voice asking for your pizza. Just don't look too closely when you hand it over, because once you do, you might not make it out of there at all.
Story number 3.
It was supposed to be just another double shift for Jordan, a college kid working nights at Domino's to pay his tuition. He didn't mind the late hours, fewer customers, easier pace. Most nights were uneventful, but there was something about this particular night that felt off. At around 2:15 a.m., the store phone rang. Jordan picked up, thinking it was a wrong number. Most people weren't ordering pizza that late. "Domino's, how can I help you?" he said. The voice on the other end wasn't quite human. It was flat, emotionless, robotic. "I would like a large pizza. No toppings, no sauce, no cheese, just crust." Jordan blinked. "You want a plain crust?" "Yes. Deliver to 119 Briar Hollow Road," the voice replied without missing a beat. Jordan typed it in. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. That address wasn't familiar, and for good reason. It didn't show up on the GPS. The closest match was an old road that had been closed off after a series of landslides years ago. Briar Hollow was barely more than a memory in this town, a place people didn't talk about. Still, he shrugged it off. Maybe it was a new development. Maybe the GPS just hadn't updated yet. He keyed in the order, made the plainest pizza he'd ever made, and hit the road. He followed the directions as best he could. Eventually, the streets narrowed. Street lights grew more scarce until the only thing lighting the way was his own headlights. As he turned onto Briar Hollow Road, the pavement disappeared under dirt and gravel, and soon he was driving through thick, overgrown woods. His cell service vanished entirely. He was about to turn around when he saw a mailbox. Rusted. Faded numbers. 1 to 19. The driveway was barely a path, but he followed it. It led to a clearing, and there it was, an impossibly old, sagging house, the kind you'd expect to find in a forgotten corner of a horror movie. No lights, no movement. He parked, stepped out with the warm pizza box in hand, and approached the porch. The steps creaked under his feet. He knocked. Nothing. Then a sound behind him, a dragging noise, slow and wet. He turned quickly, but no one was there. Only the woods and the rising fog. Jordan knocked again, harder. "Dominoes!" he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. The door opened on its own. A foul, sour smell hit him in the face. The air inside the house was dense, heavy, almost too thick to breathe. Against every instinct screaming inside him, he stepped into the doorway, just enough to set the box down on a dusty old side table. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye. On the far wall of the entryway, carved into the wood, was a single word: hunger. And then he heard it again, that dragging sound. But this time, it wasn't behind him. It was above him. He looked up slowly. Something was crawling across the ceiling. Its limbs were too long, its body contorted, as if it had once been human and forgot how. Its face was covered with skin that looked stitched shut where a mouth should have been, but he could feel it looking at him, starving. Jordan bolted. He didn't think. He ran, jumped off the porch, got into his car, and peeled out down the narrow dirt road, gravel kicking up behind him. He didn't stop until he reached a gas station back in town and puked behind the dumpster. He never went back to Briar Hollow. But something did follow him. He started getting phone calls late at night, always from unknown numbers. He'd answer, and a distorted voice would whisper the same words: "Just crust. Just crust." One night, he stayed late at the store, trying to finish some paperwork. Around 3 a.m., the oven suddenly turned on by itself. When he checked it, there was a pizza inside, raw dough, plain crust. He hadn't made it, and etched into the inside of the oven, burned black into the metal, was that same word: hunger. Jordan quit Domino's the next day. No one took his story seriously. But deliveries still get called in from that address. Drivers sometimes get sent, but not all of them come back. Those who do, they don't talk much. They say the thing in that house doesn't want toppings or cheese or sauce. It wants something else, something warm, something living, and it's still hungry.